Thank you, Swami. Happy birthday, Swamiji. Good evening to everybody. Yeah, it's always so subdued in here. A little more energy then. Good evening.
Good evening.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yeah, you can sing that if you like. So he was born 151, 152 years ago, depends on whether you count his time in the womb. And he was born in 1863. So 1863 in this country is not a great time. Right? We're still fighting to end slavery. And we're in the middle of the Civil War. Thousands and thousands of people are being slaughtered. Skip ahead 151 years, 52 years. Nothing really has changed. We're still fighting for the same things. That could make me very depressed, but I take medication. But it doesn't. And the reason it doesn't is not the medication. The reason it doesn't is because this seems to be the human condition, and it's even in the midst of this human condition that amazing things happen. So I believe that Swami Vivekananda was the catalyst for one of the most amazing things that has ever happened to the human species, and it's in its early infancy. What I'm talking about is something that scholars call the Second Axial Age. Now, talking about the Second Axial Age means I have to tell you a little bit about the First Axial Age. So let me do that quickly. Axial age, axial is like axle for a wheel. It's a moment in time when some amazing turn of consciousness happens. An amazing shift in what it is to be human happens. And it's a long period. The first axial age started somewhere during the period 800 BCE to 200 BCE. The 600-year period. Over that 600 years, every known religion, religions that have left us written records, every religion in that period, sometime in that period, underwent a radical transformation. And the transformation was away from magic and toward compassion. The religions began as a way of controlling the gods. If I sacrifice the right animal on earth, I can control what God does in heaven. If you read the book of Leviticus, in my tradition or the Christian tradition, about all the ways you sacrifice, basically you're sacrificing animals to keep God from killing you. Right? God gets angry, you did something, and so to calm God down, you kill something. That was religion. And for lots of people, it still is. But during the first axial age, 800 BCE to 200 BCE, things start to shift. And people realize that what God wants, just to stick with the Hebrew scripture for a moment, what God wants, as we learn in the prophet Micah, is justice and compassion and humility, not sacrifice. The prophets in the Bible are opposed to sacrifice, almost all of them, almost all the time. Where Leviticus is telling you that God delights in the slaughter of animals, the prophets say God is sickened by the smell of the slaughter. That's the axial turning. What God wants, and it's, I'm only giving you an example from Judaism, but you can take it in any tradition. This is when Confucius arises and Buddha arises and the Upanishads. All of this stuff is happening. And they're all talking about something other than magic, and ultimately they're all talking about compassion. The scholar of the first axial age, there are many actually, but the most important one, the one who's written the biggest book, is Karen Armstrong. I don't know if you're familiar with Karen Armstrong's work. One of the things I love about her work is how thorough her books are. The other thing I love about her books is how thick they are. Because when you buy them and put them on the shelf and people see that you have them, they go, wow, you read that? You never have to say, no, I didn't actually read it. They just think you did. And it's very impressive to have these big books. But in this 600-page book, on the first axial age. She documents how this transformation happens everywhere. By the end of the book, you have a sense that a second axial age is coming. She doesn't predict it, and she doesn't confess that it's happening now, but she says that if it does happen, it won't be from compassion to something else. It'll be an expansion of compassion, what the ethicist Peter Singer calls the widening of the circle. So it says, love your neighbor as yourself, and that's a small circle, your neighbor, and then later it'll say, love the stranger as yourself. But eventually we recognize that all beings are ourselves, and love extends beyond family and beyond the neighborhood and beyond the clan and beyond the religion and beyond the nation, all of that, wider and wider and wider. So Karen Armstrong's argument at the end of her book is if there's a second axial age, it'll be a widening of our circle of compassion. And again, just like in 1863, if you read the newspaper, I know you know what's going on, there's not a lot of compassion going on. Right? Anywhere in the Middle East, you don't think of the Middle East and think, oh, compassion, what a compassionate place. Right? You don't think of that anywhere. So it's not that we're going to turn from compassion to somewhere else. We're going to reclaim compassion and extend it more broadly. Now, is this happening or not? I'm going to claim that it is happening. That we are in the early decades, maybe even second century now, of a second axial turning. So it took 600 years last time, so we're just in the beginning of this one. And the kickoff, the catalyst, was Swami Vivekananda at the Chicago Convention, the Parliament, the first Parliament of the world's religions. When he talked about Vedanta, when he lifted what was basically, I obviously wasn't there, but it seems to me from what I've read, was basically a coming together of competing tribes. It's not that people came today, when you go to the contemporary parliaments of the world religions, most people are there and they have a sense that we're all one human family and that all religions have some value to them and they all have some truth. Just what Swamiji was saying in 1893 when the parliament happened. His ideas are now sort of normative for many people. But when they came together at that first parliament, they were coming together to convince one another who was right. And then he says, that's ridiculous. And the way he does it and the power with which he does it and the conviction he has, not built on a scripture or anything else, but on his own experience that what he's saying is true, I think it transformed the parliament. It uplifted everyone who was there and brought the seeds of this second axial turning. So that's when I'm claiming it started. And I would go so far as to claim that he started it. We don't know where or who was the catalyst, when or who the catalyst might have been for the first axial turning, but I think it's Swami Vivekananda for the second. Now, in his address, I'm going to read this to you. I could retell it, but I just want to give you the actual way he does it. He told them this story, and you probably know the story about the frog in the well. So it's a story you know, but I just want you to hear it. So he says, I will tell you a little story. A frog lived in a well. It had lived there for a long time. It was born there and brought up there, and yet was a little small frog. Of course, the evolutionists were not there then to tell us whether the frog lost its eyes or not, but for our story's sake, we must take it for granted that it had eyes. And that every day, it cleansed the water of all the worms and bacilli that lived in it with an energy that would do credit to our modern bacteriologists. In this way, it went on and became a little sleek and fat. Well, one day, another frog that lived in the sea came and fell into the well. Where are you from? Our fat, sleek frog said. Where are you from? I'm from the sea, said the other frog. The sea? How big is that? Is it as big as my well? And he took a leap from one side to the other to show how big his well was. My friend, said the frog from the sea, How do you compare the sea with your little well? Then the frog took another leap and asked, is your sea so big? As he leaps across his well. What nonsense you speak to compare the sea with your well. Well then, said the frog of the well, nothing can be bigger than my well. There can be nothing bigger than this. This fellow is a liar, so turn him out. And then Swamiji goes on to say that that's our problem. We all live in these little wells. We're all convinced our well is the one true well, that there's nothing outside of our well. And it's the same, the metaphor is the same as with Plato's story in the cave and the people who only see shadows on the wall and they think that's all there is. But here's the difference between 2014 and 1893. In 1893, there was no way to get out of the well. Swamiji was talking to people saying, you've got to get out. But there was no way to get out. In 2014, and I'm just going to speak about the United States because that's the only data I have, but I think it's global. But in 2014, especially in the United States, people are climbing out of the well. The little frogs are hopping out. They're not falling in, they're hopping out. And that's new. In the recent Pew Forum study on religion in the United States, the study found, and the Pew is the best study we have of these things, the study found that 20%, 1/5 of all Americans are out of the well and are called, in the Pew survey, nuns, not N-U-N-S. They didn't all become Catholic sisters. N-O-N-E-S. Because on the survey, when they asked them to identify their religion, you could be Hindu, you could be Buddhist, you could be Jewish, you could be Christian, all the way through Muslim. And then at the bottom it says none. So they checked none. So they call them nuns. 20% of all Americans, that's huge. The last time they did this survey, it was, I think it was 14%. So it's moving very, very fast. But that's the whole population as a whole. 1/3 of all Americans under the age of 30, it's 33.33%. 1/3 of all Americans under the age of 30 are nuns. That's even more huge. Because you can imagine all Americans, well, the older ones are going to die off, but the younger people, the millennials they're called, people who are born 1981 and after, that group, the millennials, they are going to be the vanguard of a move toward, I don't know, I mean this is a joke, but the nunnery, right? They're going, I know, sorry. Oh, that hurt, bam. That's why I'm going to tell you in a minute, I hate the word nun, I've got a better word. But what I'm talking about is people jumping out of the well. Somehow their search for truth has made them so strong and so fearless that they bound out of the well. Just the opposite of our little sleek fat frog in the well who likes it there, who thinks that's all there is. 25% of all the United States, 33% of all people 30 and under are leaping out of the well. Now, what does it mean to be a nun? Lots of people think it means they're anti-religion. It doesn't. A lot of people think it means they're anti-spirituality, but that doesn't prove to be the case either. What they are is, what makes them nuns is that they refuse to limit themselves to one well. Another word we have for this now is multiple belonging. And in Judaism, we see this all the time. We have all kinds of names for it. We have lots of Jews who are Buddhists. They're called Jubus. We have lots of Jews who are Sufis. They're called Jufis. And we have lots of Jews who are Hindus. They're called Hindus. That's the lingo we toss around. We also have Jews who are Christians, and we call them heretics. But that's another thing. That has a long history to it, and we won't get into it. But this is happening everywhere. I go to conferences I go all over the world, but all over the United States, and I'm constantly running into people who are grounded in more than one religion. Just a few months ago, I met this wonderful Episcopal priest who was a monastic. He was living in an Episcopal monastery, and he considered himself a Sufi and was steeped in Islam. I mean, he knew his Quran, he knew his Arabic, and he didn't see a conflict. And yet he was an Episcopal priest. Multiple belonging. But that's not the word I use for nuns. The word I like for nuns in my new book, Perennial Wisdom for the Spiritually Independent, is the term spiritually independent. So they're not anti-religion. They're just bigger than any one religion. They draw from a variety of places. So I look at these people as you would look at people who say, I'm politically independent. I don't belong to the Republican Party or the Democratic Party or the Green Party or the Socialists or whatever else you've got, Libertarian Party, the Natural Law Party. I don't belong to any of those, but I think there are ideas that the Republicans have, and some Democratic ideas and some Libertarian ideas and Natural Law Party ideas and whatever I left out there, Libertarian ideas. I see there's value in different things that these different groups are proposing, and for me personally, I weave the things I like together, and that's my politics. But there's no place to check off what I am on the list. When I personally, actually for myself, when I go to register to vote, and they say, are you Republican or Democrat? I can't say. So I say independent. Because there are things I like in one and things I like in the other and things I hate in both. So I'm independent. So what I mean by spiritually independent is someone who says, there's some brilliant ideas in Christianity and in Islam and in Hinduism and Buddhism and Taoism, and I'm going to take the truth wherever I find it. That was radical in 1893. It's still radical today. But I think that's what Swami Vivekananda was teaching. That they, as it says in the front here, that the truth is one, but people call it by different names. And the names matter because the names bring us different nuances about what the ultimate reality is. So if I can learn from different names, if I can use these different names, if I can be educated in those different systems, I will be more nuanced in my understanding of reality. I will become closer to realizing my own divinity and the divinity of all things by opening my heart to all of these religions. There's not a lot of places you can go where there are signs around the room and symbols and on the carved glass up front from the various religions. Like if I go into a Catholic church, the chances of them having a stained glass window of Muhammad on there, it's never going to happen. Right? In a synagogue, the same, right? Or in a mosque, and mosques don't have those kinds of things. But you're not going to find in a mosque, quotes from the Bhagavad Gita. But you do in other places. But even if you didn't anywhere, the frogs that are jumping out of the well, these spiritually independent people, that's what they're hungry for. Now, one last thing from the sociologists about this. And that is, in the Pew Study, they go, well, is this going to last? And they say, maybe not. Maybe these are young people, they're talking about the 30 and under, and they're just checking things out, but they'll grow older, and they will get married, and they will have children, and then they're going to decide, I'm going to raise my children as an X, so that they can put an X in the box. That may happen for some. It isn't going to happen for most of these people. They didn't leap out of the well in order to jump back into it later when they have children. They leapt out of the well because they realized that no silo, no well has the capacity to bring you the entire truth. You have to free yourself from that. So why? Because we're talking about my son, who's married. He's in that millennial generation. I know what he thinks. I know what his wife thinks. They're open to religious truths because I raised him this way, I think, but I didn't raise her, and she has the same attitude. They're open to truth wherever they can find it, in religion and science and art and music and literature, and they don't want their children raised in a single system. They want their children to be at least as open as they are, if not more open, because their values aren't going to change so drastically from I'm open to wisdom wherever I find it to I'm going to put blinders on and I'm just going to see wisdom where, the Torah tells me to look, or the priest tells me to look, or the Quran tells me to look. It's not going to do that. It's not going to happen. So it's only going to grow, and this is the start of the Second Axial Age. And Vivekananda laid the groundwork for that. We're going to see how. Here's the problem these people face. They're free from the well, and then they don't know what to do with their freedom. So Erich Fromm, back in the 50s, wrote a book called, he was a famous psychologist, he wrote a book called Escape from Freedom. And his argument is that people don't want to be free. That when they find themselves free, they run away, they run to find some place where they can get themselves enslaved. And that the challenge of being a truly realized, he's not talking spiritually, but psychologically healthy human being, is to learn what to do with your freedom. My argument is Vedanta helps us find out what to do with our freedom. And let me suggest some ways it does this. So one of my favorite little booklets of Swamiji's is Vedanta, the Future Religion. And if you haven't read it, spoiler alert, no. That's the answer. No, it's not. And the reason it's not, and I'm going to take issue with it a little bit, but the reason it's not the future religion is because in his mind, when he wrote this in, now I can't remember, 1900 maybe? Yeah, 114 years ago. So he wrote this in 1900. The reason it's not is because he believed what people are looking for is what the fat, sleek frog is looking for, and Vedanta doesn't offer that. But I don't care about the fat, sleek frogs. I care about the frogs who had the guts to leap out of the well. And those people need some guidance. And the fact that Vedanta is lacking what the sleek, fat frogs want is only a plus for the newly free and probably frightened frogs outside the well. So what does he say? Swami Vivekananda says there are three things that a well religion needs. I don't mean a good religion. I mean a religion that's a well. Okay? Three things. It needs a book, it needs to venerate a person, and it needs to be absolutely certain it's right and everyone else is wrong. And then later he says a personal God. But those first three those are the first three things he comes up with. He says Vedanta has no book. Vedanta says you can't rely on any book. He says Vedanta doesn't venerate an individual. And he says that Vedanta is open to truth from everywhere and thinks that all the religions have truth in them, and doesn't allow for the wearing of blinders and saying, no, only this is true and everything else is false. So he said, well, for that reason, it can't work, because people want a book to venerate someone and to be so sure that they're right and everyone else is wrong, maybe going to hell or wherever they're going. We don't offer that. The people who have leapt out of the well, the newly freed and maybe frightened frogs, say that 3 times fast, freed and frightened frogs. That was rhetorical, but thank you. They don't want a book, a venerated person, or certainty. They left that on purpose. In Swamiji's story, the frog from the sea fell into the well. It was an accident. These frogs are leaping out on purpose. They don't want a book, but that doesn't mean they don't want to learn. That just means they don't want someone to say to them, there's only one book, read this one, and that's it. Not just, this is the truest one, don't read any other books, they'll only confuse you with lies. They don't want that. They don't want to have a church of any kind have a banned book list. We want you to stay the straight and narrow, so don't read these books. Just read these approved books. That's not why they left the well. They left the well to see what the truth is. that doesn't mean they know what books to read. That just means they're open to being instructed. So the fact that Vedanta doesn't have one book but honors many books is a plus. We offer a library rather than just one book. Venerating an individual. Now, we're not talking about gurus and things like that. He's talking about elevating, saying that this person is God and you're not. That's ultimately what he has in mind. And he says, we don't do that. Well, that's not what people are looking for either. In Erich Fromm's understanding in Escape from Freedom, he worries that that's exactly what people want. They find themselves free, so they latch on to someone who will have all the answers for them. What Vedanta says is we have great teachers, we have great gurus, we have Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, etc. But ultimately, the divine is in you. Realize it. It's not that if you worship X, you're going to wake up. It's that you engage with the teacher or the guru in order to discover you're the guru. He says somewhere, your mind becomes the guru ultimately. You're a manifestation of the divine. But if you just hear that in some vague way and you're just recently out of the well, that means nothing to you. So as they're hopping around looking for what to do next with their freedom, it's easy to be trapped and say, oh, jump into this well, jump into this well. But Vedanta says, no, here's the sea. We'll teach you how to swim in the sea. You don't need a well. He goes on to talk about certainty. I don't think they want certainty either. My son doesn't. My daughter-in-law doesn't. They know that not knowing is part of the process of spiritual evolution. As soon as you say, I have the answer, you stop the questing. And the answer is always some kind of abstract thing or whatever it is, but it's external to you, and you glom onto that, and you say, okay, this is it. I'm done, I'm finished, I'm safe. But reality is never done, it's never finished, and it's never safe. Learning how to live with the uncertainty that reality is, learning how to live with not knowing until you actually realize divinity. But not stopping the process of realization before you've had that moment, but saying, no, neti, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, until you finally realize what it is, after you've been stripped free of all the possible things that people are telling you it is. Vedanta offers a way to live free. That's my argument. And Swamiji is teaching that from the very beginning. Now, I'm not saying that the Ramakrishna ought to be, going out and proselytizing. That's not my suggestion. I'm not saying that Vedanta centers like this one, even though you're right next to Millennial City here at Brown, should be out, proselytizing. I have this fantasy of, remember those Lucy cartoons in the Peanuts where Lucy would set up the little cardboard box and it says, the doctor is in, 5 cents? I could see, a saffron colored painted box out on campus somewhere and Swami's sitting in the box, And there's a Swami is in, 5 cents. And people might, come up and talk to him. I know he interacts with students all the time. But I'm really not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting proselytizing in any way. But I am suggesting that we recognize and consciously prepare for the free frogs searching, and know that what happens here is, this is my opinion obviously, but what happens here is the best that could happen to them at this moment. That they don't fall, look, I'm a rabbi and I'm supposed to worry about the future of the Jewish people, but Judaism is a well, and I recognize that. And when my son hopped out of the well, not to stop being Jewish, but to be Jewish and look to Taoism and look to Buddhism and look to Hinduism and look to science, and I applauded that because I don't want sleek fat frogs. I had a congregation for 20 years of sleek, fat frogs. And I kept saying, jump, hop, get out of there. And they kept saying, is he a rabbi or what? So I don't want to push people into another well. I want to help those who have found a way out find a way to the sea and how to navigate the sea and not be frightened of the sea. So in 1900, when Swami Vivekananda was writing this, this stuff in his Vedanta, the Future, and there's another book I want to talk about, his address 7 years earlier. When he was doing that, he couldn't imagine people hopping out of their wells. So he wasn't prepared for that. But I think we have to be prepared for it. We don't even have to imagine it. It's happening. We have scientific data to show us that it's happening. So we have got to decide, how do we address that? Again, not by getting, it's not a membership drive, but it is an obligation, not as, I'm trying to make this as subtle as possible. The obligation is not the obligation as Vedantins. The obligation is as people who have hopped out of the well. Unless for you, Vedanta is a well, and I don't know anybody like that, but I'm sure there are. But anyway, if you're out of the well and this is how you're navigating the sea, I believe you have a moral obligation to make that known to other people hopping around going, what do I do now that I'm out? To bring the wisdom of the world's scriptures to as many people as possible. I wanted to do, in my campus, Middle Tennessee State University, every year we have, I don't know what you'd call it exactly, but Free Bible Day. And there are people who come on campus with bushels of Bibles. And as you walk around campus, going from class to class, building to building, they stuff Bibles in your hand. Free Bibles. I mean, I have so many free Bibles, I don't know, you just don't know what to do with them. You don't want to throw them out. And I keep saying, no, thank you. And I end up with 5 of them anyway. What I would love to see is, there's a book in the bookstore called The World's Scriptures. I think that's the title. It was a conference done somewhere, one of the Vedanta centers, and it talks about all the different people writing about their different scriptures, showing the best parts of each one. I have this fantasy of having a free World Bible Day where the best teachings from the Tao Te Ching and the Gita and the Torah and the Quran and all the different scriptures, the best of them, just lines, just teachings, are produced in a very inexpensive way that could be mass-produced and then handed out to students. Not to convert them to one religion or another, but to say, hey, if you're out of the well, this book might speak to you. Because it has a direction, but it doesn't have a trap. When we pull the truth out of our sacred texts, and I don't mean ours as in Hindu or Jewish, I mean ours as a human, as in all of human sacred literature. When we pull the truths out of the huge library of sacred texts that humans have created over the centuries, they don't agree on every point, but I argue that they go in the same direction, and the direction is toward more and more and more compassion. Because I'm talking about the true parts of those texts. The parts that don't do that, I'm claiming they're false. I wouldn't put them in a world Bible. But in a collection of world scripture, what people would see is all the different ways that different religions of the world have talked about compassion. All the different ways the religions of the world have helped embody compassion when they're at their best. And so we can say, no, I'm not a Christian, but I take this strand of Christianity, this teaching from Christianity to heart, because it's so rich. I'm not a Hindu, I'm not a Buddhist, but there's Hindu teachings and Buddhist teachings that speak to me and help me be a better human being. I'm not a Jew, I'm not a Muslim, but I find things in the Torah and the Quran that help me be a richer, more loving human being. Why are those not my scriptures? Just because, in my case, my parents were Jewish, I'm not allowed to read the Gita? Well, if you ask the rabbis that taught me when I was a kid, that's what they would say. That's paganism. You'll be corrupted if you read that. I was corrupted, I read the Bible with all the crazy stuff in there. But those people, like the rabbis that taught me when I was a kid, the audience to which they are speaking is shrinking. And the second axial age is creating a whole new audience. The first axial age transformed what was going on inside each well, but they didn't put an end to wellness. The second axial age is getting rid of the wells, eventually. Not in one fell swoop, but eventually. There'll be so few people in the wells, they won't matter anymore. More and more and more people will be living outside the well in freedom, either frightened and easily exploited, which would be horrible, or invigorated and excited by teachers and teachings, and in a moment we'll talk about practices that can help them realize the truth in their own lives as they choose. Not that they choose the truth, but as they choose to practice. That's what I think it means to live outside the well. So he couldn't see this back in 1893. He couldn't see it in 1900. I think we have to see it now. It's in our face. People are looking for something deeper than mere worship, though. They're looking for practice, a transformative practice. Now, it can't be that complicated. You know, people say, oh, do you teach Kabbalah? You know, Jewish mysticism? No, I don't. It's too complicated. It's too much in the head. And almost never in fact, not almost, Kabbalah is all in the head and it never gets to the heart. It's not transformative, except in an intellectual way. That's why, though Kabbalah was around for 1,000 years, in the 1700s, it had to undergo a radical transformation into Hasidism, which was all about the heart. Hasidism took the map that was Kabbalah and said, you know what, get it out of your head and get it into your heart. And it'll lead you to joy, and it'll lead you to love. Now, that lasted 2 generations, and then you get, you know, the Hasidic Jews we have today, who are not the most joyous or loving people I've ever met. But that's what happened to Hasidism, because it went right into the wells. In fact, they dug sub-wells of competing Hasidic wells. So it went in the wrong direction. But for a couple of generations, it had the potential to transform Judaism once again. The teachings of the practices of those mystics in the 1800s in Judaism are not unlike mantra practice that we have in Vedanta. They're not unlike centering prayer that you find in Catholicism. They're not unlike, well, actually, if you take the basic contemplative practices without putting specifics on them, you find a basic set of practices that every religion has, because there's only so many ways that get people to transform, get people to realize their true nature as the divine. So, alongside a book of world scripture, there needs to be a book of world practice. And we could probably have chapters, you know, practices that use text, Lectio Divina, chanting texts, you know, practices that use mantra-like things. So saying the Jesus prayer over and over again, like they do in Greek Orthodox Christianity or Russian Orthodox Christianity, or in Judaism saying one of the short prayers or names of God over and over and over again. You know, just like we do in Vedanta. Every tradition has this. Not everyone is going to want to recite, you know, Hare Krishna. That's not going to speak to them. Not everyone is going to want to recite Harachaman, in Hebrew, the compassionate one. Not everyone is going to want to recite, Lord Jesus, have mercy upon me. But the list is much longer than that. And people will discover the power of mantra, and they'll find, or teachers will help them find the mantra that works for them. So, when you're out of the well, you're not out of luck. There are teachings, and there are texts, and there are techniques that are available to people who are no longer in a well. What they need are guides. Someone who can say, not jump into my well, but here's what truths are out there. And we know they're true because every religion seems to say the same thing. And not just every religion, science seems to be saying the same thing. And science can help us understand why mantra works. Science can help us understand what happens in the brain when you chant. Not too far from here in Philadelphia is one of the leading experts in your brain on mantra. His name is Andrew Newberg, and he writes these books based on his research where he wires people's brains while they're meditating or while they're praying or while they're chanting. And he sees what the brain is what's happening to the brain. And from that he extrapolates how it is that we fine-tune the brain to awaken to the divine reality in which the entire body, but to which the brain lives. It's like the brain is a radio, and the divine is the broadcast frequency, and in our normal life it's just because it's not on the station. But through chanting and through prayer and through meditation, you can, and then you can get it tuned right, and then you hear, the station. Maybe your favorite station is, WWOM. All Om, all the time. Maybe that's your station. Or maybe you have 5 different presets. There's Om, you like that in the morning, but in the afternoon, you really want to go with a Sufi channel, and whatever it might be, because ultimately what's being broadcast is the same thing. Justice and compassion and love and awakening to the divinity of all beings. So, in the Chicago address, he also says that we have to avoid, and this is almost near the end here. I know you told me I had 45 minutes, but I forgot to look to see when I started. So I have no idea, but I'm going to wrap it up.
No, you continue.
I can continue.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I can start all over again. Well, we can open it up a little bit. But anyway, in one of his addresses in Chicago, because he gave multiple talks, he talks about, he didn't put it this way, but one-size-fits-all religion. That the way religions operate is, everyone should fit into this. That's no longer working. What we need is a one-size, if you like, I'm not sure I like this phrase, but a one-size-fits-all spirituality. In other words, everyone has access to the spiritual. And you can shape it to your own unique size. The challenge that people say, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. First, the attack against what I'm saying to you is called synchronistic. You're just taking things from different traditions that don't mean, that weren't meant to go together, and you're saying they're the same thing, and they're not, and you can't do that. Stephen Protheroe at Boston University is a great scholar of the world's religions, and he is a huge enemy of what I'm saying. He believes that each well has its own integrity, and you need to understand the different wells, but don't say, truth is one, different people call it by different names. Truth is not one. There's a Hindu truth and a Buddhist truth and a Muslim truth and maybe sub-truths and all those things, and they're not the same. I've heard him in interviews, and he's very clear. I've read his books. He's very clear. That's what he thinks. And he believes that until we accept each religion as it is, as a separate, we're saying you cannot have world peace. I'm saying as long as there are wells, there's wars. And my hope is that as more and more frogs hop out, it's going to be more and more difficult to get people to war with one another, because wars are always one well against another. So when there's not enough people to wage war, it might shift. But Protheroe is asked in many interviews, well, what about mysticism? What about the great mystics in all the different religions? They seem to be saying the same thing. And his answer is always the same: mysticism, schmysticism. That's not what religion is. So I could argue with that, or I could say, okay, you're right. Let's go today with, okay, you're right. Religion is the wells. The mystics are the people who have hopped out. I'll go with that. More and more people are hopping out. They need to hear from the great mystics. And I think that Vedanta is one way of doing that. It's not one size fits all. It's not that we're trying to put all these things together and force them to fit. They do fit when we take them out of we leave the things that belong in the well, and we discover the great truths, like what's written around here. and discover they're all directing us in the same way, in the same direction. So I don't worry about synchronistic. I have no problem with that. The next complaint is it's a buffet. You go in, we went to an Indian restaurant for lunch and they had all different things in the buffet, and you could take whatever you want. And I only took what I liked, right? So that's natural. You're not going to eat something. They had okra. I don't like okra. So I didn't eat okra. Now, do I know I didn't like that okra? No, I didn't want to say it because it's okra. So maybe it was delicious. I have no idea. But the word okra, that's enough to say, no, you're not eating that. So I didn't eat it. Fine, doesn't matter. I took what I liked. And I could take from anything I liked. Applied to religion, well, then you're going through and you say, oh, you don't like this practice, you don't like this idea, you don't like sin, forget sin. You think ignorance is better, I'll take a little ignorance, and I'll take a little meditation, a little chanting. I don't want to do prayer, I'll leave that one. And you're just creating your own path. And the complaint is, that doesn't work. I was once asked, there was a big survey done of religion teachers and practitioners, clergy, and we were asked about this idea of taking one from column A and two from column B. And is this a good thing to do or not? Everybody said it's a terrible thing to do, except me. I was the only one in this big survey, because they printed my thing as only one person objects. And they put my name on it, and I was proud of that. I said, no, it's fine. It doesn't matter if I'm looking to deepen my sense of compassion for others. The way that works best for me is from the Buddhist tradition, metta practice. I learned it in a Buddhist setting. I use it regularly. It's changed my life. It's changed my relationships with people. It works for me. I'm not going to drop it just because it's Buddhist and not Jewish. It works. The only criteria that I care about is, does it work? Now, not everything's going to work for everybody, but that's fine. Once you're out of the well, you have this vast array of options, all of which have the good soul-keeping stamp of approval on them. They're proven options. I think they all move you in the direction of holiness and ultimately divine realization. But they're all slightly different because we're all slightly different. It's not one size fits all, but you can weave together your own outfit. And that's what people are going to be doing. And if you're afraid of that, I don't mean you specifically, but my fellow rabbis, for example, or people who are tied to and earn a living from the well nature of religion, if you're afraid of that, you can't speak to these people. And you shouldn't. But what the liberated frogs are going to need is someone who says, no, I understand what you're saying. What you need to do is you need to learn how to sit still and be quiet. Here are 12 different ways that people have developed over the centuries to do that. Explore them. See which one resonates with you. And then go more deeply into it. If you happen to find a way that's from the Hindu tradition, you might want to go to a Swami and learn how to do it better. But that doesn't mean you're going to have to become a Hindu. It means you're going to have to become better at that practice. But the teachers are going to have to liberate their teachings and their texts and their techniques from the well also. And say, no, I can't teach you this until you jump into my well. If a teacher says that to me now, I go away. I don't want to deal with it. I want someone who says, no, I understand you're dealing with freedom now. Let me help you become more free, not less. And the ultimate freedom is to realize your own divinity. Let me show you how to do that. Not by putting you in a well, but showing you what I have to offer. And if it doesn't work, let me introduce you to my friend, Bishop Paul, and he will help you. And maybe that doesn't work, and then you try, Swami, and then if that doesn't work, you'll try someone else, and maybe what it's going to be is some literature professor, or maybe some violinist. I mean, who knows the many ways that people can awaken to their own divinity. But we need those kinds of teachers. Not teachers who are going to say, no, join my well, but teachers who can help us on the outside. So let me bring this to a close this way. Again, I'm not suggesting that the Ramakrishna Order or any Vedanta center, not even this one, certainly not this one, I'm not telling you what to do. Certainly wouldn't tell Swamiji what to do. I'm not saying you should go in and proselytize at Brown. Again, let me just make that clear. But I am suggesting that Vedanta centers such as this, and other places as well, but we're talking here, I am suggesting that Vedanta centers in general are uniquely equipped to help those growing number of frogs who are leaping out of the well. This could be a way station for well leapers. You know, it should be a big sign out front, frogs welcome. Newly freed frogs welcome, something like that. So I think, I mean, if all the, and I don't, and this sounds prejudiced and I have to apologize, that's not exactly, maybe I am, but it seems to me that versus any synagogue I know, a Vedanta center is much better equipped for what I'm talking about than a synagogue. You go to a synagogue, you talk to the rabbi, the first thing the rabbi has to have you do is learn how to go You have to go Baruch and Chachma and all that. Yeah, but not everybody can do that. So you can spend 20 years of your life going, no, that's not it, right? That's bringing you into the well where you have to dress a certain way and eat a certain way and all of that. And there's things to say about that at some other time. But Vedanta centers are uniquely prepared to accept people where they're at, freed and frightened, looking for deeper meaning without throwing them into a well. They need guidance. And I think that what Swami Vivekananda couldn't see, which is why he said Vedanta is not the future of religion, is that in 2014, Vedanta may be the future next step of spiritual evolution. That Vedanta may be the next push turning the second axial of human consciousness. That not alone, there are other people doing this in other systems and no system, but Vedanta is uniquely equipped historically, but also philosophically and practically with the four yogas, that Vedanta is uniquely equipped to push that turning all the more powerfully and to offer guidance to those newly freed frogs in a way that will keep them free and make them even freer. So it's an honor to be among the freed frogs and to celebrate one of the freest frogs of any time, Swami Vivekananda's birthday, here at the Vedanta Center in Providence. So thank you very much for having me. Swamiji, thank you.